Good morning, members of the press gallery and viewers. Good to be with you. I represent Justice for All Canada. We are a human rights and advocacy organization focusing on genocide prevention on a global scale. We're also a nonprofit, and we carry United Nations consultative status. My name is Saliha Farouk, and I am a government relations manager with the organization. Today, we stand in solidarity with 700 Canadian academia, including college and university students, who have recently signed an open letter, a joint letter, denouncing relentless targeting of Gaza-based universities and indiscriminate killings of their leadership and their students by Israeli armed forces. This joint letter is asking Canadian colleges and universities to support the newly announced ceasefire by the Canadian government. A few figures that are emerging from the impacted region: approximately 439 students, academics, and employees from university communities were killed by air raid bombardment across the occupied Palestinian territories at this moment. About 11 higher education buildings across Gaza and the occupied West Bank were either completely or partially damaged or entirely demolished. 19 higher education institutions in Gaza are disrupted, and this is currently impacting around 88,000 students, severely limiting their access to education. Face-to-face education was disrupted in all 34 higher education institutions in the West Bank, and that has impacted 138,000 Palestinian students. We denounce these shocking attacks on Palestinian academic institutions and their communities as grave violations of international law and violations of international legal standards. We pay tribute to certain individuals such as Professor Sofyan Taya, who is recently covered by Canadian media extensively. He was a distinguished scholar. He was a professor of physics, as well as the president of Gaza's largest university. Tragically, he was killed alongside his daughter, his sons, and his grandchildren by an Israeli airstrike at his home in Jabalia refugee camp. He was a brilliant scholar who had spent the last year researching cancer treatment at the University of Waterloo. These actions, no doubt, constitute a war crime, and they are reminiscent of recent historical massacres such as the Bosnian War and the Rwandan genocide, during which intellectuals and professors and teachers and students were systematically targeted and killed. This is not just an assault on academia, but this is a wiping out of an entire generation of Palestinian leaders and knowledge keepers. This is genocide. I am honored to introduce Canadian leaders from the Palestinian diaspora who will speak to the devastating impacts of Israeli aggression on education in Palestine. Dr. Besma Abdelghafar is the Vice President of Maqasid Institute. She is an international consultant on policy, governance, and Muslim affairs, and a professor of public policy. She earned her PhD in public policy from Carleton University as well. She has worked in the Canadian federal government, academia, and in the nonprofit sector. Welcome, Dr. Besma.
Good morning. Over 18,000 Palestinians have been killed, and many remain under the rubble in Gaza. I have lost many dear friends. Well over 45,000 have been injured, and 1.9 million people have been displaced. And there has been extensive destruction of all aspects of civilian infrastructure. Israel has cut off food, water, medicines, and electricity, and prevented aid convoys from delivering relief. There is nowhere to shelter, it is getting cold, and people are starving. Beyond this, one should not have to offer further justifications for an unequivocal and permanent ceasefire, backed by all measures necessary to ensure compliance. But we are here today for a specific demand. We are asking Canadian universities, colleges, and educational institutions to demand that our government call for a ceasefire, that it condemn the targeted destruction of places of learning at all levels and the targeted assassination of Palestinian academics, intellectuals, and professionals, that it honors their legacy through a commitment to rebuild infrastructure, initiate collaborations, offer scholarships, and demand the protection of Palestinian educators, students, intellectuals, and their institutions. In light of this focus, I want to share 3 core beliefs that Muslims hold sacred. First, that knowledge is the inheritance of humanity. This is a deep-rooted Islamic belief of a prophetic teaching. It is a universal law that we all benefit from shared ideas and that we benefit from each other's discoveries and innovations. Knowledge from the past, the present, and yet to be discovered in the future. The killing of intellectuals and the destruction of educational institutions robs humanity of this inheritance. It robs you and me of invaluable wealth, of cures, of technologies, of literature, of language, of ways of knowing and being that contribute to our collective resilience. Second, that seeking knowledge is an obligation on all Muslims. This too is a tenet of our faith. And so the targeted destruction of schools, universities, public libraries, museums, and centers for learning, the disruption of and perilous access to them for tens of thousands of individuals is extremely disconcerting. And finally, that repositories of knowledge are to be protected and not jeopardized by hostilities in times of conflict, so that their knowledge can be preserved and utilized for the benefit of those returning from war and to rebuild their societies as they recalibrate and return to normalcy. Targeting intellectuals and other educational personnel by Israel is clearly intended to silence dissent, to undermine the future of Palestinian people and their ability to rebuild their communities, to innovate, to engage in trade, to participate in scientific and cultural exchanges, and to connect globally with like-minded peers. By focusing on intellectuals, we are not in any way diminishing the value of any life. As a beautiful Indian proverb says, all the flowers of all the tomorrows are in the seeds of today. I would like to kindly remind you of a document that a group of Canadian university presidents agreed to in September of 2021. The role of Canadian universities in societies states, and I quote, "Universities can play a major role in addressing the issues that threaten society. We can leverage and mobilize our education, research, relationships, assets, resources, scale, reach, and influence to pursue societal solutions and significantly transform economic, social, and political systems needed to address society's challenges. We can amplify and harness the passion of student changemakers and mobilize our diverse constituencies, faculty, staff, alumni, and community, business, and public sector partners to drive local and global change. At this pivotal moment, university leaders have an opportunity to make decisions and take actions that will reverberate beyond our own borders and lifetimes to give students and children agency in and hope for creating a better future." End quote. I say to those presidents today, in your silence, given the atrocities, given the genocide taking place in Palestine right now, that is grabbing the attention of your students and people around the world, your integrity and our humanity as Canadians is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Basma. Our next speaker is Mohammed Nijim, who is a current PhD student in the Department of Sociology at Carleton University. He completed his master's in sociology at the University of Manitoba. He is a Palestinian from the Gaza Strip and is currently based in Ottawa. Mohammed's main research is centered on the Gaza Strip and the socioeconomic implications of Israeli punitive measures. His master's research focuses on the concept of slow-motion genocide and its applicability to the situation in Gaza. For his PhD, Mohammed intends to conduct his research on the political economy of Gaza, the racial capitalism, and focus on the racial capitalism as well as genocidal violence, with a particular focus on the triggers of October 7th, 2023 attacks and the settler colonial history behind that. Thank you for being with us, Mohammed.
My name is Mohammed Nijim, and I'm a PhD candidate at Carleton University. Today I stand before you not just as an academic, but as a concerned human being, deeply troubled by the distressing images and videos emerging from the Gaza Strip. I'm profoundly affected by the ongoing Israeli aggression as my family, relatives, and friends reside in Gaza. Tragically, I've lost 4 friends, and my younger brother was recently injured. The longer we wait, the greater the chance of losing loved ones. Many of my relatives and friends were compelled to move southward within the Gaza Strip amidst bombardments. Seeking refuge in shelters, they now face catastrophic conditions. Disturbing reports indicate the spread of diseases due to the absence of bathing and drinking water, a scarcity of hygiene essentials, and insufficient food supplies. Gaza is not on the verge of collapse. It indeed collapsed and has reached a state of uninhabitability. Israel's destruction has spared no aspect of life in Gaza, including hospitals, bakeries, grocery stores, local bazaars, water facilities, communication lines, schools, and universities. The educational system is in crisis, with students unable to attend schools, many of which have been fully or partially destroyed. Shockingly, 4 days ago, Israeli soldiers broadcasted the bombing of 3 UNRWA schools in the northern part of Gaza Strip, live on social media, accompanied by the laughter of soldiers in the background. Moreover, Israel committed a horrifying massacre at Al Fakhura school in Gaza, claiming the lives of thousands of innocent people seeking shelter there. Israel's current aggression has resulted in the tragic death of over 8,000 children, who should have been protected by international law. These children who were supposed to enjoy education and playful activities are instead bearing the consequences of trauma and aggression. Children in Gaza are now displaced, constantly searching for security and carrying mattresses from one place to another in a desperate quest for security. Numerous experts and scholars characterize Israel's actions in Gaza as a textbook example of genocide. Notably, Prime Minister Netanyahu calls for a form of cultural genocide, expressed through his call for a transformation in the educational system in Gaza. He proposes introducing new curricula to impart a fabricated history to indigenous children, with the apparent aim of eroding their Arabic and Palestinian identity and potentially undermining their language. The destruction of educational institutions in Gaza extends to universities and colleges. Israel deliberately targeted prominent institutions such as the Islamic University, Al-Azhar University, and Al-Quds Open University, along with numerous other colleges. They also deliberately targeted university staff, such as renowned scholar Sofyan Taya, which further underscores the gravity of their actions. Dr. Taya, recognized as one of the top 2% researchers globally in physics, served as a visiting professor at the University of Waterloo just last year. Before his tragic death in an Israeli strike in the Jabalia refugee camp, Dr. Taya, who also served as the president of the Islamic University of Gaza, conveyed a message to his colleague, Dr. Omar Ramahi of Waterloo, urging him to inform Canadians about the wide-scale destruction inflicted upon universities in Gaza. The casualties also include Rifat Al-Arir, another professor at the Islamic University of Gaza, known for his vocal advocacy for Palestinian rights through writing and appearances on various TV and social media outlets. Al-Arir, who never bore a gun, but wielded a pen to educate Gaza's youth on how to convey their voice to the world in English, tragically lost his life. In a poignant poem anticipating his death, he expressed, "If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale." This ongoing violence has led to the loss of hundreds of Palestinian university students and the tragic deaths of numerous teaching staff. This is a genocide targeting all walks of life and happening live on TV. Instead of seeking the destruction of the Gaza Strip, Israel must recognize Palestine as a sovereign state and end its decades-long occupation. Without doing so, more human loss will occur, as history has shown us. The continuation of the current assault is slowly conducing to mass starvation and an epidemic that can spread out very quickly. Canada has a unique opportunity to align itself with principles of justice by not only urging an immediate ceasefire, but also taking practical measures that compel Israel to cease its atrocities and end the 17-year-long blockade along with the occupation. This moment also provides Canadian universities with a significant platform to align with core values and emphatically call for an end to the ongoing genocide. Let's not be silenced. Let's not be intimidated, and collectively stand up for the oppressed and give Gazans some hope.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Our next speaker, Dr. Iyas Salim, is a global and international studies lecturer at Carleton University. He had co-founded the Research Center for Human Dignity while an assistant professor at Doshisha University in Kyoto, Japan. He carries over 12 years of experience managing developmental and humanitarian projects at Japan's International Cooperation Agency in Gaza and the West Bank in Palestine. Welcome, Dr. Iyas.
My name is Iyas Salim, and I teach at the Global International Studies Department of Carleton University. On Monday, October 23rd, Professor Ibrahim al-Astal was killed with his wife, 2 daughters, Ibtihal and Afnan, and a number of his relatives when Israel bombed his home in the city of Khan Yunis in the south of Gaza Strip. He was the Dean of Education at one of Gaza's largest universities. Ibrahim was a lifelong friend of mine and a former classmate in high school with whom I shared a bench in class for 2 years. 5 days before his house was bombed on October 18th, I reached out to Professor al-Astal, asking him about his well-being and that of his family. His brief response, "Thank God, I pray for the safety of everyone," highlighted the daily difficulties of insecurity, fear, and the absence of electricity and internet communication in Gaza. 5 days later, I was shocked to see a social media post featuring a photo of Professor Ibrahim, reporting his house had been bombed in an Israeli airstrike, killing him and his entire family. It was very heart-wrenching and sad to hear the news of the death of a dear friend and his family. He was a very kind and gentle person and of high integrity. I take pride in our lifelong friendship and shall cherish the carry Ibrahim's memory forever. Tragically, there are more stories of loss in Gaza's academic community. On Tuesday, November 14th, one of Gaza's most prominent figures in higher education and a respected biology scientist, Professor Mohammed Shubair, was killed with his wife, his son's wife, and her child, and 7 more relatives who were seeking shelter in his home in Gaza City. He was a highly respected scholar and educator who contributed immensely to higher education in Gaza. Professor Shubair was a family friend going back for many years. Similarly, the Dean of the Medical School at the Islamic University of Gaza, Professor Dr. Omar Farwana, was murdered when Israel bombed his house on October 15. The bombing killed the entire family of Professor Farwana, including his wife, his children, daughter, Dr. Aya, a medical doctor, and his grandchildren. The entire family of Professor Omar was wiped out, ending their lives in an instance of a missile attack. Israel is waging a barbaric bombardment on civilians and civilian infrastructure, including the targeting of higher education, institutions, academics, faculty, and students, and schools. Gaza's top universities, the Islamic University of Gaza and Al-Azhar University, have both been carpet-bombed and reduced to rubble by Israel's US-supplied jets and most advanced missiles. Israel used airstrikes to blow up the Islamic University in Gaza on October 16. This amounts to war crimes. In bombing and destroying universities, Palestinian higher education is being reduced to rubble. Many students, faculty, and university staff remain under rubble. According to the UN, a total of 258 schools, or 51% of all schools in Gaza, have been destroyed or partially damaged by Israel. Israel's aim is to make life impossible for the Palestinian inhabitants in Gaza. Recently, 15 Palestinian universities issued a statement saying the cumulative effect of the bombing has resulted in massive and ongoing killing of people, many of whom are students, faculty, and staff. It also caused displacement and destruction, imperiling even the possibility of access to education for generations of Gazan children and students into the indefinite future. We call upon Canadian universities, colleges, scholars, faculty unions, university departments, and academic associations, student unions, alumni, and related organizations to call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, condemned Israel's genocidal actions and the targeting of academic communities and the destruction of universities and higher education infrastructure. Palestinian students have hopes and dreams, and education offers them the success they aspire in life. As the saying goes in Palestine, education is a ticket to a future. Those professors, scholars, and academics who were murdered are immortals, and their memories will live forever through the thousands of students in Palestine and everywhere globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. E.S. And in my brief conclusion, I want to start by thanking our speakers for sharing their lived experiences, their grief and their pain with us with so much grace and courage and bravery. We are inspired by you. And we are here to humanize Palestinians, to believe Palestinians, and we ask the world to do the same. Voices like the ones that we've heard today from the speaker standing behind me are sadly missing from the narrative across North America, which is unfortunately biased and discriminatory. And much of it is inaccurate. We call on Canadian universities and colleges to endorse calls for a ceasefire recently announced by the Canadian government, and we implore them to recognize that this is a human rights issue which is totally devoid of any politics. Canadian schools should recognize the severe impact of Israel's bombing campaign on education access in Palestine and on student and professor lives. They should advocate for protecting Palestine's academic communities, many of whom, just like Professor Sofyan Taya, have contributed immensely to Canada's academia. And there should be attempts to aid students directly threatened by ongoing airstrikes and bombardment in the occupied Palestinian territories as we speak right now. Last but certainly not least, we do acknowledge Canada's announcement of supporting calls for a ceasefire, but it does come at a late and heavy cost, which I must highlight today. After nearly 20,000 Palestinians were brutally killed, around 75% of whom are women and children. After countless atrocities committed and a region in turmoil, these are real numbers. Canada's ceasefire calls also follows these thousands of murders of Palestinian children in cold blood. It follows several abstentions from critical United Nations resolutions which were attempting to advocate for the protection of Palestinian life and dignity. And they had failed without Canada's vote at the UN. It followed attempts by Canada to obstruct ICC war crime investigations into Israel when Canada resisted to cease arms sales to Israel as well. We call on the Canadian government to urgently condemn Israeli violence and disproportionate actions against Palestinians. Every life is precious, but I want to emphasize that the disproportionate use of force is very clear on the Palestinian side. We look for legal accountability for atrocities, which must be pursued at the highest levels. We ask for Canada to be consistent with ongoing recommendations made by the United Nations and by several NGOs. There must be an immediate cessation of arms and military equipment sales from Canada to Israel. Just because a ceasefire was advocated for at the UN by Canada doesn't mean a ceasefire was actually implemented. So we also ask for Canada to work towards the effective and long-standing implementation of an actual ceasefire. Canada must review its arms trade policies and cease transactions with the Israeli government that may contribute to human rights violations or breaches of international humanitarian law. We also ask for urgent, adequate, and uninterrupted delivery of humanitarian aid, including essential provisions for pregnant Palestinian women, around 50,000 of whom who are expected to give birth in deplorable conditions, for children who are undergoing surgeries without any anesthesia due to bombings that had affected different parts of their bodies, and for Palestinian people living with disabilities who are facing the brunt of the hostilities in that region. Lastly, Canada should actively support a rules-based international humanitarian law and justice mechanisms, as well as an independent investigation into the killing and kidnapping of civilians, journalists, as well as civil society workers, such as the professors that we're referring to in our event today, as well as the bombing of hospitals and civilian infrastructure. I once again want to sincerely extend my heartfelt gratitude to our speakers today, as well as the members of the press gallery. And we hope that we could walk away with doable actions. And we're ready to support any peaceful resolution that the Canadian government wishes to level at their international allies. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions from anybody in the press gallery, we can answer them now.